Are you delivering the coffee? The question, slick with a patronizing smirk, cut through the low-frequency hum of the Joint Operations Center Annex. Major Natalie Ford didn't turn. She stood before the secure access terminal, her common access card held between her index and middle fingers, waiting for the system to process her credentials. The air chilled to a precise 68 degrees to cool the racks of servers lining the walls, felt suddenly warmer on the back of her neck. She had chosen a simple professional royal blue blouse for the temporary duty assignment. Worn under a standard issue fleece jacket she had just taken off and draped over her go bag. It was comfortable for the long-haul flight and practical for the series of back-to-back briefs she was scheduled to lead. Apparently, it was also a source of confusion for the young captain standing behind her, whose reflection she could see in the dark screen of the terminal. He was textbook, sharp haircut, crisply ironed OCPs, and an air of unearned confidence that came from a command climate that likely mistook arrogance for leadership potential. "I'm sorry," Natalie asked, her voice calm and even. She didn't look at him, keeping her attention on the screen as it blinked, thinking. "The coffee," he repeated, gesturing with his chin toward a small kitchenette alcove in the corner. "The colonel likes a fresh pot before the 0900 sink. If you're not with the catering staff, then this area is restricted to cleared personnel only." His tone was the auditory equivalent of a pat on the head. In the periphery, 2 Air Force staff sergeants, both buried in checklists at a nearby console, looked up. They didn't say anything, but their typing paused. An audience was forming. Natalie finally turned a slow, deliberate movement. She let her eyes travel from his polished boots up to the silver bars on his chest. "Captain Davis, according to the name tape, I am cleared personnel captain." She held up her CAC. The gold chip gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Major Natalie Ford." Davis's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he reassembled it. Stronger this time. He squinted at her ID. "A major, right? Well, I haven't seen you around here before. This is the SOCOM JC. We have specific access rosters. What's your unit?" This was the part she hated. Not the challenge. Security was security, but the transparent disbelief, the insinuation that her presence was an anomaly that needed special scrutiny. It was a tax she paid far too often. "I'm here for the morning brief," she said, her voice remaining placid. The terminal in front of her beeped, a cheerful green-lit confirmation. "Access granted." She slid her card out. Davis stepped forward, placing a hand on the terminal's frame, blocking her path. "Hold on, let me see that." Natalie held her card out for him. He took it. His fingers brushing hers and held it up to the light as if he were a jeweler inspecting a fake diamond. He turned it over and back. "Ford, okay, I'm still going to need to verify your access. We've had issues with credential errors." It was a lie, and they both knew it. A credential error on a SAC would have triggered an armed response from the military police, not a condescending interrogation from a junior officer. He was fishing, enjoying the small dominion he had carved out for himself in this chilly, windowless room. The 2 staff sergeants were now watching openly, their pre-flight checklists forgotten. Captain Natalie said, her patience starting to fray at the edges. "The system, which is linked directly to the Defense Enrollment Eligibility Reporting System and the Joint Personnel Adjudication System, just verified my credentials and my clearance level. It seems to believe I belong here. Are you suggesting its algorithm is flawed?" His jaw tightened. He was losing control of the encounter and didn't like it. He looked from her face with her long blonde hair tied back in a neat regulation bun down to her simple blue top and then to the CIA again. "I'm suggesting that I am the acting officer in charge of this annex until my commander arrives, and I have a duty to ensure everyone in this CIA has a valid reason to be here. A name and a rank on a piece of plastic isn't enough. I need to know your billet. Who are you working for?" The question hung in the air, a clear challenge to her authority and legitimacy. He wasn't asking for a unit. He was asking for a male superior who could vouch for her. "My billet is not relevant to my authorized presence in this room." "Captain," she said, her voice dropping a half octave. It was the voice she used when explaining a complex tactical problem to a slow-thinking subordinate. A voice that carried an implicit warning. The screen said, "I have access. I'm going to my console." She reached for her card. He pulled it back. "I don't think so," he said, his voice rising slightly. "We can do this one of 2 ways. You can tell me who your sponsor is, or I can call the MPs and have them escort you out while we sort this out. Your choice." The word escort was a deliberate humiliation. It implied wrongdoing, trespass. The room, which had held about a dozen people, was now growing quiet. The low hum of the servers seemed to magnify, filling the space left by the absence of chatter. More eyes were on them now. A Navy Chief Petty Officer, his uniform bristling with ribbons, turned in his chair. A grizzled Army Warrant Officer, whose face looked like it was carved from a block of wood, paused his conversation and watched, his expression unreadable. Natalie felt a familiar hot flash of anger, but she quenched it instantly. Emotion was a liability. The rules were her shield and her weapon. Captain Davis, your own regulations, specifically USS SOCOM Directive 3811, state that electronic verification via the Secure Access Control System is sufficient for entry into a SCIF, provided the individual's clearance is adjudicated and their identity is confirmed. You have my ID. You saw the system grant me access. Any further delay you cause constitutes a willful obstruction of a superior officer in the performance of her duties, a violation of Article 90 of the UCMJ. She recited the information coolly, precisely. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. For a moment, Davis looked stunned. He hadn't expected a point-by-point legal rebuttal. He glanced around the room, feeling the weight of the audience's attention. He had committed himself to this path and now felt he couldn't back down without losing face. He saw her as a test and he was determined to win. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more insulting than his previous shouts. Look, Major, I'm sure you're very important, but we have actual mission planning happening here. High-level stuff. If you're from Public Affairs or the JAG office, you can get your brief from the summary later. Right now, I need this console for my team. He was creating a narrative for the onlookers, painting her as an outsider, a support officer who had wandered into the operational heart of the command. He gestured to the workstation she was trying to access, one of the primary mission command nodes. Natalie took a slow, deliberate breath. She said, her jaw. I am not from PAO or JAG. That console is assigned to me for the duration of this exercise. Now, if you'll return my identification card, I have work to do. As she spoke, her fingers idly brushed against a heavy metallic object in her jacket pocket, which was slung over her bag on the floor. It was a habit she had when her patience was tested. Davis's eyes followed the motion. What's that in your pocket? He demanded, his focus shifting, looking for any new angle of attack. Another challenge coin from the Spouses Club bake sale. Natalie paused. She reached into the pocket and pulled out the object. It was a challenge coin, but it was unlike any he had seen. It wasn't perfectly round or polished. It was thick, heavy, and irregularly shaped, forged from what looked like melted-down artillery shell casings. In the center was a stark, stylized carving of a winged dagger plunged into a mountain peak. There was no unit name, no motto, just the raw brutalist symbol. The captain scoffed. Cute. Did you make it in arts and crafts? The coin was cool against Natalie's palm. She didn't hear the captain's J. She heard the deafening rotor wash of a Black Hawk helicopter fighting against a high-altitude wind in the mountains of Afghanistan. She felt the biting cold, the air so thin it hurt to breathe. The coin was a memento, a bond forged in fire and ice on a mission that never made the news. It was given to her by the Afghan commando leader, a man with ancient eyes and a warrior soul. After she had called in a danger-close airstrike that saved his entire Kandak from being overrun, he had pressed it into her hand and said in Pashto, "You are the Sky Warrior. You have the heart of a lion." The winged dagger represented her. The mountain, the impossible peak they had taken together. The memory was so vivid, so immediate that for a second the sterile air of the jock smelled of cordite and dust. She blinked, returning to the present. Davis was still talking, his voice a droning annoyance. "So unless you can provide me with a 3-star general who can personally vouch for you, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." That's when the warrant officer in the corner, the one with the face like carved wood, finally moved. He'd been watching the entire exchange, his eyes narrowed. He had seen Davis take a CAC and had gotten a clear look at the name 4D. To him, the name was familiar, but it was the call sign whispered in after-action reports and intelligence summaries that he truly remembered. Valkyrie. He didn't stand up. He didn't say a word to the captain. He simply swiveled in his chair, picked up the secure telephone on his desk, and punched in a 4-digit extension. He shielded the receiver with his hand, his back to the unfolding drama. "Sir, it's Chief Warrant Officer 4 Miller," he said quietly, his voice urgent. You need to come down to the Juicy Annex right now. A pause. No, sir. The network is fine. We have a situation. A personnel issue. Another pause. Miller's eyes flicked over to where Captain Davis was now puffing out his chest, preparing for his final triumphant move. It's Captain Davis, sir. He's detaining a visitor. Miller listened for another second, then delivered the critical payload. He's got Major Ford. Yes, sir. That Major Ford Valkyrie. The silence on the other end of the line was more eloquent than any shout. Miller knew what was happening in that office 4 floors up. He could practically hear the clatter of a coffee mug being slammed down, the scraping of a chair being shoved back, and the thunderous eruption of a full-bird colonel realizing that one of his proudest peacocks was trying to pluck the feathers of a golden eagle. Help was on the way. The audience in the Duke Annex now sensed it too. The air, already thick with tension, was now charged with the unmistakable electricity of impending justice. Colonel Mark the Wren, Deputy Commander of Operations for the entire Joint Command, stared at the secure phone receiver in his hand as if it had sprouted tentacles. Are you certain, Miller? He asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Positive, sir. The Chief Warrant Officer's voice crackled back. I saw her CAC Ford NA. He's making a scene. Threatening to call the MPs. The Wren slammed the phone down. The sound echoed in his spacious wood-panelled office. On his desk, a framed photo of his smiling family seemed to mock the impending catastrophe. He stood up, his chair flying back and hitting the credenza behind him. Captain Davis, a sharp officer, good on paper, but with an ego that could eclipse the sun, and he had just cornered one of the most vital and discreet operational commanders in the entire theater. Sergeant Major, Theron bellowed, his voice carrying easily through the thick oak door. The door swung open instantly. Command Sergeant Major Wallace, a man who seemed to be composed entirely of muscle, discipline, and scar tissue, stood in the doorway. Sir, get the command staff. My vehicle. Now. We are going to the Duke Annex. Is there an exercise alert, sir? Worse, Theon growled, grabbing his cover from a hook. We have a blue-on-blue fratricide incident in progress. An officer is about to shoot his own career in the head, and I have to stop him before he takes the whole command's credibility with him. He strode past the sergeant major and down the hall, his mind racing. He pulled up Major Natalie Ford's file on his secure tablet. As he walked, the screen lit up with a string of accomplishments that read like a Spec Ops recruiting poster. West Point, Distinguished Honor Graduate from the Sapper Leader Course. Ranger School, Bronze Star with Valor Device for actions during a close-quarters ambush in Iraq. Command of a cultural support team attached directly to a Tier 1 unit. A master's degree in irregular warfare from the Naval Postgraduate School. And then there was her current billet. So heavily classified, it was designated only by a code name, Commander Joint Special Operations Task Force Viper. JSF Viper wasn't just any task force. It was the tip of the spear's tip, a multi-service, multinational unit responsible for the most sensitive counterterrorism and strategic reconnaissance missions on the continent. Natalie Ford, at 34 years old, commanded assets that most 4-star generals would envy. She was a ghost, a legend whispered about in classified circles, and Captain Davis, in his infinite wisdom, thought she was here to pour the coffee. The quickened his pace, the sergeant major matching him stride for stride. The institutional failure this represented was staggering. This wasn't just about one arrogant captain. It was about a culture that could still in this day and age look at a woman in a royal blue top and see a helper instead of a warfighter. Back in the Duke Annex, Captain Davis had reached his endgame. He felt the eyes of the room on him and interpreted their stunned silence as support for his authority. He had given the major a chance to comply, and she had met him with defiance and legalistic jargon. It was time to put an end to the charade. All right, I'm done asking, he announced, his voice booming with false authority. He pulled his radio from his belt pouch. I'm calling the Base Defense Operations Center. I'm going to report an unauthorized individual in a secure facility, possibly under false pretenses and with fraudulent identification. They will escort you to a holding area until this can be verified. It's a serious charge. Major, you could be facing a court-martial. He was pushing her past the point of no return, creating a scenario where even if he was wrong, the sheer momentum of the official report and the involvement of the MPs would tarnish her. It was a vicious, petty abuse of power, and he wielded it with the casual arrogance of someone who had never faced real consequences. Natalie Ford just looked at him. Her face was a mask of placid neutrality, but her eyes were cold, hard chips of ice. She didn't speak. She just waited. She had seen men like Davis before in every corner of the military. Men who confused procedure with purpose and rank with wisdom. They were predictable, and they always eventually overplayed their hand. He was about to press the transmit button on his radio when the main doors to the Duke Annex swung open with such force that they banged against the stoppers. The room fell into a silence so profound that the hum of the servers sounded like a jet engine. Colonel Mark the Wren strode into the room, his face a thundercloud. Flanking him was Command Sergeant Major Wallace. Behind them were the J3 Operations Chief, a Navy Captain, and the Command Senior Enlisted Leader, an Air Force Command Chief Master Sergeant, a woman whose stern expression could curdle milk. The sheer weight of the collective rank that had just entered the room was suffocating. 4 senior leaders, all moving with a singular urgent purpose. They weren't walking, they were hunting. Captain Davis froze, his finger hovering over the transmit button. His face went pale. He had been expecting a pair of junior MPs, not the entire senior command of the base. Colonel Theron's eyes swept the room, ignoring everyone until they landed on the tableau in the center. Captain Davis, holding a radio and a CAC, standing over a calm, composed major in a blue top. Theron's gaze was like a physical blow. He walked directly toward them, his boots echoing on the polished concrete floor. He didn't stop at Captain Davis. He walked right past him as if he were a piece of furniture and came to a halt directly in front of Natalie. He snapped to the sharpest, most respectful position of attention Davis had ever seen. His back ramrod straight. "Major Ford," Colonel Loren said, his voice ringing with authority. He raised his hand in a salute that was crisp and perfect. "My sincerest apologies for the delay and for the unprofessional welcome you have received. I assure you it is not indicative of this command." Natalie returned the salute. Her own movements economical and precise. "Colonel, no apology necessary. Your captain was just being thorough with his security protocols." The words were professional, but they carried a razor's edge. The entire room understood the subtext. Davis looked like he had been punched in the gut. Colonel Loren dropped his salute and turned, his eyes finally falling on Davis. The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. "Captain," he began, his voice deceptively soft. "Give me the Major's identification card." Now, Davis fumbled with the CAC, his hand shaking slightly, and held it out. He snatched it from his grip and handed it back to Natalie with a respectful nod. Then he turned his full, undivided attention back to Davis. "Captain Davis," the Wren said, his voice now rising to a controlled roar that filled every corner of the space. "Let me provide you with a small piece of situational awareness since yours seems to be so catastrophically deficient." He gestured toward Natalie. "For the benefit of everyone in this room, this is Major Natalie Ford. While you were busy ensuring she wasn't the barista, you failed to recognize the lead planner for Operation Serpent Strike, the officer who personally rewrote this command's entire irregular warfare doctrine. You failed to recognize the commander who 2 months ago led a joint task force on a hostage rescue mission that resulted in 0 friendly casualties in the recovery of all 3 assets. She has conducted more direct action missions than your entire company combined." He took a step closer to Davis, who seemed to be shrinking inside his uniform. "More to the point, Captain, Major Ford is currently the commander of Joint Special Operations Task Force Viper. Her name is on the access roster you were supposed to have memorized this morning. Her brief, which you are now officially late for, is to inform this entire command about a credible imminent threat to our forward operating bases. A threat her operators uncovered. You weren't obstructing a visitor, Captain. You were obstructing the single most important person on this base today. You were obstructing the mission." A collective gasp went.